In March 2014, new protests erupted in 31 Turkish cities after a teenager injured in the protests of the previous summer died. The boy's story was widely circulated on social media, and the framing of his circumstance added to the growing sense of injustice. 15-year-old Birkin Elvin, it was reported in the New York Times, was struck in the head by a tear gas canister while fetching bread for his family. The outcome of the public relations efforts tied to Gezi Park protest has been multifaceted and has had international implications. Olympic organizers listed the protests as one reason Istanbul was not awarded the 2020 Summer Olympics. The widely publicized police crackdown in 2013 and 2014 have been condemned by Western nations and human rights organizations. European Union foreign ministers postponed EU membership talks with Turkish officials and raised doubts about whether Turkey will be admitted as a new EU member. Within Turkey, Prime Minister Erdogan's plan to enact a new constitution based on a presidential system took a serious blow, and many believed his administration was at a crisis point, especially after corruption charges in December 2013 against high-level officials and businessmen with close affiliations to the government. Turkey's tourism industry suffered significant declines in revenue, and several countries, including the U.S., issued warnings for tourists considering travel plans to Turkey. On the fourth day of nationwide protests, June 3, 2013, Istanbul's stock exchange suffered its largest one-day loss in a decade, down 10.5%. The study of public relation efforts of Turkish protesters illustrates how activism can play a central role in a campaign that is structured not through the corporate frame of consumption and production, but through a moral framework whose purpose is to expose injustice and to expand human rights, not to maintain organizational stability and status quo or increase company profits. Demetrius argues that, quote, only when we are disarticulated from productive forces can we achieve a new version of communication, end quote. Likewise, Dorina Holzhausen, author of Public Relations as Activism, Postmodern Approaches to Theory and Practice, discusses the possibility of the practice to, quote, bring about a more just and egalitarian society, end quote. The communication strategies of the Turkish demonstrators incorporated key components of a successful public relations campaign. This is especially evident in their response to restrictive government decrees and police brutality towards demonstrators, events that escalated the non-traditional and traditional media tension and immediately increased the reach of the movement's message as well as its constituency. However, whereas the traditional organizational PR approach champions the practitioners' attempts to stabilize, support, and/or reassert the established organizational hierarchy, especially within the dynamic of a PR crisis, where the organization may experience an attack of some kind, the activist role in the social political movement is to subvert and destabilize their opposition while building consensus among their publics. To do this, protesters established their own networks to promote their campaign, especially through Facebook and Twitter. The fact that these outlets have become powerful is reinforced by repeated attempts by the Erdogan government to block social media in Turkey, as well as ongoing monitoring by police of popular Twitter hashtags and Facebook sites as a way to respond to and anticipate nightly demonstrations and protests. Media beyond control of protesters was co-opted for their purposes. During the massive police response to Gezi Park occupation in June 2013, one Twitter user posted an image showing what was on television on Turkey's primary stations and the message, quote, right now, the TV channels. None of the stations was covering the protests, a fact that was utilized, promoted, and shared by protesters as further evidence of mainstream media's failures and their ties to the dominant paradigm. During the Gezi crackdown, another protester tweeted, quote, seriously, CNN Turk is airing a show on penguins, end quote. Protesters recognized and promoted the absurdity of this contrast between what was happening on mainstream media and what was happening on the streets of Turkish cities by broadcasting the realities on the ground via YouTube. Supporters around the world live the raw moments of Turkish protests and the police response through graphic videos and images that portrayed unarmed individuals standing up to battalion lines of fully armored police protected by shields and wielding batons, and military vehicles known as tomas that shot high-powered water cannons at unarmed protesters. These images succeeded in portraying Turkish demonstrators as victims of oppressive force and reinforced the validity of their cause. The lack of an unidentifiable hierarchy and organizational structure has made the protests more difficult to dismantle by the dominant power structure. Despite attempts to imprison protesters and silence journalists, the government's response seems incapable of having any effect on the uprising other than fanning the flames. Erdogan's own efforts to respond on Twitter have been ridiculed, and his public dismissal of the protest's legitimacy has fueled increased solidarity and commitment by a growing disgruntled Turkish populace. In an attempt to improve the government's image, Erdogan reportedly recruited 6,000 people to tweet on behalf of the ruling AKP Justice and Development Party. The use of social media as a communication tool, which began with the Occupy movement and advanced and morphed into the Arab Spring, has come to a new level with the Turkish resistance. During the height of the police crackdown in Gezi Park, at least 2 million tweets with hashtags related to the protests were posted during a 24-hour period. Unlike similar uprisings, a majority of those Twitter feeds came from the demonstrations rather than from international supporters. A study by 2 New York University graduate students found that 90% of geolocated tweets came from within Turkey, and half of the tweets were from within Istanbul. In contrast, the study notes that only 30% of the people tweeting during the Egyptian Revolution were located within the country. In March 2014, Turkey blocked the use of Twitter. A week later, the government blocked YouTube. According to the International Federation of Human Rights, more than 2,600 people were detained from across Turkey in the wake of the police crackdown at Gezi Park. 48 of those detainees were arrested because of the Twitter messages they sent. The protesters' cause has been publicized using creative forms of nonviolent public expression, such as the Standing Man protest, the proliferation of anti-government graffiti, often incorporating humor, and by painting stairways in rainbow colors, all examples of controlled media PR tactics that seek to co-opt government messages and actions that attempt to either discredit or halt their own. The ability of Gezi Park protesters to promote their cause through social media and inspire international coverage of their movement has effectively broadcast and called attention to the instability of what had been one of the world's most stable Muslim countries. The protests that began as an effort by environmentalists to protect a neglected city park in Istanbul has, in response to each dictate and overt action of their government, evolved into a grassroots PR campaign where each demonstrator and sympathizer serve as a conduit for spreading a narrative of injustice compelling enough to break through the noise. Furthermore, the collective force of the demonstrators and movement sympathizers is powerful enough to circumvent those vehicles capable of delivering their message but politically ill-suited to do so. As author Elif Shafak pointed out in an editorial in The Guardian in March of 2014, quote, while Turkey's mainstream papers and TV channels are reluctant to give full coverage to these tragedies, the internet is awash with public anger. Via YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, Turkey's young urban population is increasingly voicing its discontent and frustration.
Pashmina